Okay. Um, so there's a bit misnomer here. It's Water 101, but you know, there's not a lot of water law around watersheds. I'll touch on a couple of things, but there's a lot of activity there. And so let's just start with here's what I'm going to go through. What's a watershed and why do I care? Main watersheds in the Colorado and Larimer County. Water supply for Larimer County, and a touch on in-stream flow rights to introduce the next speaker. So what is a watershed? A watershed, this is a great pictorial of it. I couldn't find a picture that had snow in it, so I had to add that oval of snow on top there. So watershed is an area of land that drains all the streams and rainfall to the common outlet. It depends on precipitation, snow and rainfall. But not all of that comes out to the river. A lot of it is soaked up by the ground and goes into groundwater. Also, you have plants along the way that start using that water to grow, and so that's kind of where we are with a watershed. You also lose water to evaporation, as I said, land cover, and the soil. Did I do that right? Right. All right. So there are four main watersheds, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the state of Colorado. And we're, of course, looking at a piece of the South Platte. Now, I added this other map because that's a map of all of the national lands in the state of Colorado. And most of the watersheds stem from federal land, and that would be mostly forests. Something called the Organic Act of 1897 gave the President of the United States the ability to set aside land for timber, watershed protection, and forest protection. So all of the greens that you see there are forests. Now, why do you care? Why should we care about watersheds? Well, they provide water for ecosystem and human needs, for drinking water, agriculture, recreation, and other uses. But they're also serve to help the ecosystem in other ways. Nutrient cycling, carbon storage, erosion sedimentation control, water filtration, flood control, food, timber. We could go on and on. And I found a list on the web that also talked about acid rain. We haven't heard much about acid rain, have we? We used to talk about it a lot in the 70s. But it's there. Now, when we have restoration activities, and you're going to hear today a wonderful selection of the kind of restoration that's going on the Big Thompson and the Pooter, they do these activities within state law. And I believe you had at the first session, John Tracy, my boss and Karen's boss, talked about the prior appropriation doctrine and how that's a piece of a solid piece of law in the state of Colorado. So these projects have to work within the law. However, the legislature last year, after a lot of conversation, decided to exempt some projects so that more work can be done faster on some of the smaller projects. I anticipate we might see another push this legislative session. So here's the Pooter River watershed, 126 miles long, starting at the Rocky Mountain National Park, going down to Greeley and the confluence of the South Platte. 1.2 million acres. By the way, that's the size of Rhode Island. And it's an important economic driver. More than 330,000 residents rely on this water, 185 acres of irrigated land. And then we can't forget the recreational aspects, the kayaking, or the industrial aspects like breweries. So on the Cache la Poudre, we have Colorado's only wild and scenic river. Now, the Wild and Scenic River Act of 1968 was an act passed by Congress to protect outstandingly remarkable scenic, recreational, geologic, fish and wildlife, historic, cultural, and similar values, and protected for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. The Cache la Poudre, the dark blue on the map up there, are the wild and scenic areas. No future construction or projects can happen in those particular areas. And then the other light blue are classified as recreational, and they have certain protections also. And then we have the Big Thompson watershed here. 78 miles from the Rocky Mountains to National Park down to Greeley. Encompasses 900 square miles. It supplies drinking water to 800,000 people living on the Front Range. That's about 30 communities. And again, it's not just for municipalities, it's for agriculture and recreation. So you'll be hearing some interesting things about this river. But what we most remember about the Big Thompson are the floods. In 1976, 43 people died in the flood on at the Big Thompson Canyon. Big Thompson Canyon, you've driven up it, very narrow, high walls. There is no place to go when that water's coming down. And actually, I lost a good friend in that. So one of the advantages of watersheds is they help to stall that water, push that water, keep that water back a little bit if possible. Of course, sometimes there's just too much. And the 1976 flood was probably one of the worst disasters in Colorado. Then, in 2013, another flood with more than 19,000 people evacuated and 27,000 homes and businesses were either destroyed or harmed. And I believe that Loveland and maybe Larimer County has some interesting projects that have happened since that flood to help avoid this happening again and protecting people. 2 people died in that flood. So Karen asked me to also talk about where do we get our water in Larimer County. That map shows all the different water providers in the county, and there are a lot of them. There are 12 water service areas. There's about 13,000 wells and 47 irrigation, ditch, and reservoir companies. Fort Collins itself is served by 6 different water entities. So depending on where you live, depends on who gets your water. Now overall, though, all these entities get about 57% of their supplies from the South Platte flows, from the Big Thompson, from the Cache la Poudre, and those tributaries. However, 43% comes from the Colorado River. Now, you all have been reading about the Colorado River the last couple of years. It's in trouble. And so we all have to pay attention to that because that's almost half the water that's used here in Larimer County. The biggest project that brings over Colorado River water is the Northern Water Colorado Big Thompson project. And that's a huge project that was developed in the 30s. Water started running in the late 40s after the war. And that supplies water to towns, to agriculture, supplies it for power production, again, recreation. You all know Horsetooth and Carter and Lake Granby and yada, yada, yada. So, which reminds me, I forgot to start with my question I ask every group I talk to. What is the largest reservoir of water in the state? Yeah, you can tell the water engineer sitting here. The snowpack in the mountains is our largest reservoir. We live and die on that. So, real quickly here before Karen shuts me up. Introduction to in-stream flows. I love this program. I was director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We had an opportunity to work with a lot of good people on this, including the Water Trust that you'll hear from next. And this was interesting. In the late 60s and 70s, we started paying attention to the environment and our effects on the environment. And we started passing laws like the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act that tried to kind of back up some of the destruction that we've made. So in 1973, Colorado passed what's called an in-stream flow law. It was the very first one in the West to do that. It used to be if you did not divert water out of the river, you wasted. Also, if we delivered it to Nebraska or California, it was wasted. But in any case, so the General Assembly decided that we needed to correlate the activities of mankind with the reasonable preservation of the natural environment, and not just anybody can own an in-stream flow. That is owned and protected by the Colorado Water Conservation Board with the help of the Water Trust, and you're going to hear some really interesting things about what they've done with that. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Does anybody have, remember, we're going to have time for Q&A at the end, but does anyone have any clarifying questions before we move on to our next speaker? Oh, yes. Go ahead.
About the last slide.
The in-stream flows?
Yeah, there's a couple of pink sections on there that are separate from the red.
I think the pink sections are, at the time that map was put together, were in-stream flows that they were going for in water court. And that's an older map, but thanks.
Good question. And I'll say this now, and I'll probably say it again later. The reason we're using the mics, so everybody can hear, because not everybody has the same hearing ability, but B, we're recording, right? So if you have a question, we want you to use the mic so that if people are watching later, they know what your question was, right? With that, well, thank you very much, Jennifer. We are going to hand it over to Josh now from the Colorado Water Trust. We're going to let Karen get his presentation going. While she's doing that, I just want to make a note for you guys. If you picked up an agenda tonight, you'll notice the date for session 4 on here says November 11th. That is wrong. It's November 16th. If you look on the back, the right date's on the back. So it is November 16th, and if you're signed up for the emails, we'll send you a reminder.
Okay, let me make sure that works. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Josh Boissevain. I am the staff attorney for the Colorado Water Trust. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about Colorado's in-stream flows. I'm going to start with a little bit of historical context, continuing on from the previous slide. I'll talk about how the in-stream flow program works, and I'll talk about some examples.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
It's just, it looks funny, and I don't want it to look funny anymore.
Oh,
Well, that's how it's going to look.
that's all right.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. So I'll talk about some tools that we use, and then if I've got time, I'll walk through some examples of in-stream flow projects that we've worked on in partnership with the Colorado Water Conservation Board and that we've done on our own. So Just a little bit of background about the Colorado Water Trust. We're a nonprofit organization, and we work to restore flows to streams and rivers around the state. We started in 2001 when a group of attorneys and engineers got together and decided they wanted to come up with a way to amplify the state's in-stream flow program. We work with water users around the state on a voluntary basis, and we compensate them for the water that we put into the stream based on a market value. And everything we do is tailored to the specific stream, the stream's needs, and to the water rights that we use. And again, the prior appropriation system is really important, and it's really important that we work within that system. So just a little bit of history, going back way before 1973, when the in-stream flow program was enacted. Starting back in 1876, this is when the Colorado Constitution was enacted, and it gave every citizen of Colorado the right to divert unappropriated water. Moving forward to 1878, the state legislature got together and came up with a system of priorities and a way to distribute water among the water users that existed. This was essentially limited to agriculture and irrigation use. Other uses would come along later. But only a few years later, this new law was put to a test when drought brought about conflict on the Poudre River. The state legislature came back and came up with a way to administer those priorities and delegated the authority to do so to water courts and water officials. In 1903, the state legislature came back and basically expanded the Adjudication Act to all beneficial uses except for in-stream flow rights. And 70 years later, after all these other water uses had a chance to get water rights and get that senior priority, the in-stream flow program was enacted. So the Colorado in-stream flow program works within the prior appropriation system because the state of Colorado does not recognize the public trust doctrine. As Jennifer mentioned, the CWCB has exclusive authority for the to obtain in-stream flows. There's two kinds of water rights that the in-stream flow program uses. There are appropriative water rights and acquisition in-stream flow water rights. The appropriative, when the CWCB appropriates an in-stream flow program, it's basically just to preserve the environment, and that's essentially a minimum stream flow, just enough water to keep the backs of fishes wet. But when they acquire a water right and put that in the in-stream flow program, they can use that to preserve or improve the natural environment. So essentially that gives them a little bit more flexibility to use more water, but it still has to be based on it has to have a reasonable basis. So here you can see a full map of Colorado showing all the in-stream flow reaches throughout the state. When you're looking at this, about 97% of those are appropriations, where about 3% of those are acquisitions. So let's see. Another important thing to keep in mind is that for both kinds of water rights, there's an administrative process that has to go through board approval at the CWCB, and there's also a judicial process that you have to go through in water court to change the water right or to claim a new water right. Okay, so I'm going to walk through an example of how both types of in-stream flows work, but just to give you, to set a baseline, here's a stream. The stream starts at 10 cubic feet per second, or 10 CFS, and you've got two water rights on the stream. You've got a senior water right that's diverting 2 CFS, and then downstream you have a more junior user diverting 4 CFS. And so by the time everybody's satisfied, the stream is pretty diminished, and that may or may not be enough to preserve the habitat there. So with in-stream flow appropriation, the CWCB goes to water court and appropriates a new water right. So it gets a priority date of the year that the application was filed with the water court. And as we know, the in-stream flow program started in 1973, so 1990 for a priority date is pretty common for an in-stream flow appropriation. So let's say this 4 CFS is added to the stream in addition to what's already there. You have the same water users who are senior to this 1990 priority date. They both have the right to divert from this in-stream flow program. So you can see that it's diminished by the time it gets past these 2 users. Nevertheless, it's still augmenting the stream. So, you know, one of the downside to this kind of in-stream flow appropriation is that it's not protected. It can be diverted. But the benefit is that it's significantly cheaper and easier to do than an acquisition, and it can still preserve the environment in case future appropriators come by and claim new water rights. So it essentially preserves the status quo of the stream. Okay, so next we have an acquisition. So in this case, the CWCB acquires a senior agricultural water right, and that water right no longer is diverted. CWCB goes to water court, changes the water right to include in-stream flow as a beneficial use. That's really important. But when they do that, and they put the water in the stream, it maintains that 1890 priority, which is senior to both of these users. So because this one is senior, these 2 junior water right users don't have the right to divert it. So even if they're diverting all of the natural stream flow or all of the rest of the stream flow, they can't touch this. So this is really nice. The downside of this is that it can be very expensive to go through the water court process. So the Water Trust has, in cooperation with the CWCB, and also on our own, we've completed 25 projects around the state, adding nearly 75,000 acre-feet of water to over 600 miles of rivers and streams in Colorado. And there are, even though there's 2 types of in-stream flow rights, there's a lot of different kinds of tools that we can use to put water back into the stream. Some of these help the acquisitions program, and some of these are outside of the in-stream flow program completely. But you'll notice that even though there's a lot of these tools, they fit into kind of 3 categories. There's the permanent type, the flexible type, and the temporary type. And if you're really interested in how all of these tools work, the Colorado Water Trust, we published a white paper a couple years ago that outlines all of the different tools that can be used to put water back in the stream. So I will talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've done to support the in-stream flow program. I think one of the coolest projects that the Water Trust has done is here on the Little Cimarron. It's called the McKinley Ditch Project. It's located on Little Cimarron River, just upstream, basically, of where the Black Canyon of the Gunnison starts. We permanently acquired a agricultural water right, and what we've done is we've come up with a split season irrigation use. So we went to water court, and what we do is we lease the water back to the farmer on the land, and we allow them to do the first part of the summer season to irrigate that land, get a hay crop, and then the second season, when flows, the second part of the summer, when the flows of the stream are low or non-existent, we pay the farmer not to put that water on the field, and instead we'll use it for the flow. So this is nice because it prevents buy and dry, it allows agriculture to continue in partnership, and it's flexible. Some years we don't need to use water to restore flows, and the farmer can use it. Some years we need it for both parts of the season, so we'll take the water, and again, this is working in cooperation with the CWCB and with the farmer to determine whether that's useful. We also are doing a impact assessment of soil health and productivity of this kind of split season irrigation use. We have a similar project in Tamichi Creek, which is this particular ditch is located about halfway between Monarch Pass and Gunnison, just off of Highway 50. This one is also split season irrigation use, so similar idea. The difference is that this is a temporary program. McKinley Ditch was permanent. We bought that water. With this one, we enrolled it in what's called a 3 in 10 temporary loan. So this is really nice because you don't have to go to water court to do this, but it's only temporary. It means once you're enrolled in this program, within a period of 10 years, you can use it for 3 of those years. So, this works because we don't need that water in the stream every single year. And it gives us some flexibility to put the water in when it's needed, but also save money and keep the water and keep the land in production as well. Another project that we've done on the Alamosa River, a little southwest of Alamosa itself, we acquired senior rights in a reservoir, terrace reservoir, and we changed those water rights to in-stream flow use. And we can release those in November when the stream flows get really, really low. So this is nice. I mean, the nice thing about stored water is it's in the reservoir and can be used when you want to use it. So it's not like a direct flow, but it's nice in that way. Okay, so the final one is a kind of project that we use that is not with the in-stream flow program. It's still within the prior appropriation system, and it works a lot like a in-stream flow, but it's not. So let's say we've got this stream here, and it's severely impaired because of either municipal or agricultural use. So what we'll do is we will lease or buy water from a reservoir, and then we will transport it downstream and give it to a different beneficial use downstream. So the flow is going to be in this stream where it's needed most, but then it's sent downstream to a beneficial use. And then once, usually, so we've done this on the Yampa River. We lease water from Stagecoach Reservoir and send that down to Steamboat to use to improve their water quality. And then the next one I'll talk about we've done on the 15-mile reach just along Grand Junction and Palisade. So with this project, the 15-mile reach starts from Palisade and goes down to the confluence with the Gunnison River. It's home to 4 endangered fish species, and because of other diversions upstream, this part of the river can get pretty low. So what we do is we lease water from Rudeye Reservoir up here near Basalt, Colorado, and we transport it all the way down to be used here at the Grand Valley Power Plant to make power for Palisade. Because hydropower generation does not consume the water, almost all of that water gets put back in the stream and they get sent down through this in-stream flow reach. So it's a really great project. It's something that we can do kind of spur of the moment. It doesn't take a lot of the administrative and judicial requirements that the other kind of in-stream flow program uses. And we've used it in 2019, 2020, and 2021 for quite a bit of water. So we didn't use it this year, but it's always a possibility for next year. So with that, I will take any kind of clarifying questions. Yeah.
And before we ask for questions for Josh, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, I wanted to say thank you for being here. I know we're happy to have you. Any clarifying questions for Josh? No, awesome, love it. All right. With that, we are gonna turn it over to Eric. Eric, go ahead.
So I'd like 45 minutes, was that right? 50.
Give or take.
50, okay.
Give or take.
12? 12? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Eric Payandi. I don't speak into a microphone very often, so I apologize. But I'm the City of Fort Collins in-house water attorney. Most cities and districts throughout the state use outside counsel from law firms. Some of the larger ones like Fort Collins have someone in-house. So that's what I do. I work in the city attorney's office, and I focus pretty exclusively on water issues for the city. Let me see, is this the pointer? Yeah, these are, in case you're wondering, these are 2 local known troublemakers in the Poudre Basin that I'm pretty familiar with, but they'll lead us on. The city of Fort Collins does a lot of water-related projects. We're a pretty large municipality. We have several departments that are all pretty active in water-related matters. We have a water utility that provides treated water to our customers and other things. We have a wastewater utility, kind of the back end of the municipal water cycle that most of us would just assume not think about too much, quite frankly. We have the stormwater utility. They really help manage floodwaters, making sure rain and snow melt get back to the stream without injuring property or damaging people. And we have a natural areas department, kind of our open space department, and they're always coming up with pretty creative ideas and questions for programs we could do. In general, the city of Fort Collins, we really try to build in environmental ethics and concerns throughout all of our projects. I think it's called the triple bottom line. I forget what the other two are, but you know, I'm just the law guy, so staff members focus on that. But we really try to build in environmental concerns and considerations throughout all our projects. So we're just going to highlight a couple, I think 3 of kind of the bigger ones here. The first one is gravel pit augmentation. So this one gets a little bit technical, but I'll try to keep it at a level that even a lawyer can understand. So this is kind of a map of the, oh, that was the wrong button. This is a map. That's not a map. That's a map. This is a map of the Poudre River through Fort Collins. It kind of starts up in the upper corner, and all the green parcels are natural areas that the city owns. Over time, the city of Fort Collins has acquired a pretty high percentage of the 100-year floodplain through Fort Collins, and a lot of these have been turned into natural areas. The Poudre Trail kind of traverses through a lot of them. And a lot of these parcels historically were mined. This is the kind of sort of open pit gravel mining where it's not really like deep tunnels underground. These are just sort of big holes in the ground to dig out gravel and rocks, which are typically used for construction and other things. And basically what that does is it sort of digs a hole into the water table. And that creates some water-related challenges, as we'll see. So this is a simplified diagram of the river. So look at the top one here. This kind of bold line, that's a representation of the kind of the ground surface level. And then here, this is sort of the water table below the ground, and then the exposed water kind of in the river channel. And in a very simplified way, groundwater supports the flow of the river channel, kind of like you saw with Jennifer Gimbel's more detailed diagram. What you have with these gravel pits, though, is you sort of end up digging another hole nearby the river, and that really disrupts the groundwater flow. By exposing additional groundwater to the air, you get evaporation. You'll also have some plants on the edge consuming some of that water, and it essentially reduces the flow to the river. Now, from an environmental standpoint, this has some pros and cons because this additional pond over here creates a lot of additional habitat for animals and migrating waterfowl. But from a water rights standpoint, it creates a problem because you can't really shut off an open pit mine that's exposing groundwater. These ponds also typically have really junior rights, if any rights at all, compared to senior downstream ditches. So effectively, these gravel pit ponds are kind of stealing water from downstream ditches and users. Then the lawyers get involved. So typically, until the 1980s, these gravel pits just existed and everyone kind of carried on. But then there was a famous water court case here in the Poudre Basin in the early 1980s, and the Colorado Supreme Court said, basically, no, this evaporation, this is a use of water, and you have to get into the prior appropriation system and participate. So now you either have to do one of these different things here to come into compliance. You either have to get a court-approved plan called an augmentation plan, basically to offset those depletions with other sources of water. A different type of plan approved administratively, which is really similar. The legislature, in their infinite wisdom, also said, hey, you know, if it was before the 1980s and you had your gravel pit, we'll just give you a pass. That's what we often do in our legal system. Or also you can fill them in and not have to deal with any of this water rights stuff. So generally in Fort Collins, with all of our gravel pit properties that we own, we have several augmentation plans and have really kind of a fairly complex scheme to keep that all moving. The second big plan I was going to mention is about the Pooter Flows plan. This is something we've been working on with a whole bunch of other users on the stream, including some of our historical frenemies, Greeley and Thornton, as well as the Water Trust, Northern Waters there. And it's really a beautifully simple idea. The idea is we're going to try to take water that was historically used for crops that's gone through water court. We're going to add it to the river. While it's floating down the river, we're going to have a legal protection so other people can't use it or divert it out of the river. And then at the end of the reach, well, we can either leave it in the stream or re-divert it out. The concept is that this is all going to sort of operate on top of existing operations, so it shouldn't affect anyone. We went to the legislature in 2020. Sorry, the pandemic's kind of muddled the timeline there. We went to the legislature in 2020, got legislation to clarify that we can do this and how it would work, and now we're working through the process on the Pooter River, though it could potentially be applied statewide. Of course, when you take a beautifully simple idea like this and apply it to the real world, it gets more complex. So with our engineering firm and Josh's help, we have identified stretches of the Pooter River where there's different flow requirements. You have all these intervening diversions, a lot of details to work through, but that's still the concept. The amount of flows we're targeting per reach varies. Fort Collins, Greeley, and Thornton have all volunteered to have water added to the plan. We hope to add additional water later, but that's kind of in process at the moment. We are in water court. We filed our application in 2021. We have about 25 opposing parties that we're working through our issues with, and we have a trial set for October 2025. And typically water court cases do settle before you get to trial, and I think we're hopeful that working through that. We're also talking with ditch companies to try to work through those issues there. And then the last one is our Halligan water supply project. Basically, we're trying to enlarge an existing reservoir, Halligan Reservoir, to meet our future demands for the Fort Collins utilities supply area that was on the map with all those water providers. It's basically the majority of central part of Fort Collins. This is the existing Halligan Dam. It's not in the middle of nowhere, but you can see the middle from the dam. It's actually one of the original concrete arch dams. You think of Hoover Dam as that concrete arch. This is one of the original ones. It predates Hoover Dam. It kind of has an interesting history. Initially, they wanted to make the dam larger and more of a classic structure. They started building it, and then they realized they were never going to have enough concrete or enough money to complete it. So they did this really innovative design at the time. It's basically an arched wall, and it holds back the water. What Fort Collins would like to do is to expand this reservoir by rebuilding the dam to increase its capacity. Currently, it's about 6,400 acre feet, and we want to enlarge it by another 8,000, so it's about twice the size or so. That's the level of lawyer math that you're going to get from this presentation. Oh, one other thing I'd mention, you can kind of see on this photo here, these are in fact water seeping through the dam. It does pass safety inspections, but it does note that this is a dam that's going to need to be replaced one way or another, and we in Fort Collins think we might as well replace it and improve the community. Some key attributes to the project. This is sort of a larger map here. You can see Halligan way up here. It's about 25 miles northwest of Fort Collins. We'll enlarge that. To get the water to our system, it will need to float down 22 miles of the North Fork. Comes here, this is kind of the Gateway Park area, partway up the Pooter Canyon, where we will divert the water into our system. We have a pipeline that takes it to our treatment plant here, and then it's distributed. Some key aspects of the project are that The water rights we're going to use are water that was historically used to irrigate Fort Collins. We've gone through water court to change it, to store it and use it there. It'll re-water stretches of the North Fork that have historically been bone dry because of irrigation company operations. It'll increase habitat, and we have about, I forget the number, 16 some odd $1 million of other mitigation as well. Gonna skip this slide. I'm getting the sense I need to. No? Oh, 45 seconds. When I mentioned that parts of the North Fork are dry, these are the most dramatic. This is below a current diversion structure on the North Fork, and this is the North Fork below that. It's been that way since the late 1800s because of irrigation company operations, and this is another stretch that is historically dry. This is the amount of flow we're going to consistently release out of Halligan Reservoir, the enlarged reservoir, to maintain those flows. It takes a long time to get the permits, particularly the federal permits, to do that. We started the process 2004, 2006, depending on how you start counting. Our final environmental impact statement is actually going to be released on Friday. That doesn't mean the process is done. That just means the environmental impact statement is done. And we still have a few more processes, one with the Larimer County, not that I'm lobbying or anything, just an FYI, and a few other things, and then we hope to get the project under construction by 2027.
All right, do we have any clarifying questions for Eric? Oh, there's one in the back. Hold on just a second.
Is there a minimum size on the gravel pit augmentation requirement?
No. When it comes to the concept with an augmentation plan is you're sort of diverting water out of priority when you don't have a right to, and so you get your augmentation plan to offset those diversions. Depending on the river basin and how tight the water supplies are, I've seen augmentation plans done for less than an acre foot. Denver Water has a new big building they built, and they wanted to capture runoff from their roof to use it on site. And I think they had to do an augmentation plan for that for like half an acre foot a year. It's kind of amazing. Not necessarily amazing in a good way or a inspiring way, but amazing nonetheless.
Awesome. Good question. Thank you. All right. With that, thank you, Eric. We'll talk to you again in a little bit. Next up, we have Laura. So, Laura,
Yeah,
take
thank
it away.
you. Jennifer and I must have been drinking the same Kool-Aid because I have a couple of very similar slides to start off with. So I'm going to quiz you first. All right. So what's a watershed? Can anyone give that definition? Since you were obviously listening to Jennifer, right? Which one am I supposed to press? The stop one? Oh, okay, that makes sense. I don't give a lot of presentations, so. All right, well, let me help you out. Now you'll really, yeah, you're right. There is no snow. So now this is really going to drill it into your brain. So a watershed is a land area where the surface water drains to a common stream, creek, to a larger channel, larger river, eventually to a lake, reservoir, or other body of water, eventually to the ocean. If you'll notice, oh, there we go. You notice that there's boundaries to the watershed as well. Why are healthy watersheds important? How do we use watersheds? Drinking water, yep. Drinking water is super important to all of us along the Front Range, anywhere, and we're really lucky that we have a great source of water in Colorado. A lot of other areas are not that lucky. We use water for businesses. We use a lot of water for agricultural reasons. We use water for recreation. That's also super important to a lot of us in Colorado. We use it for wildlife habitat, for just general aesthetics. So yeah, it's really important to all of us living here, and we all live in a watershed. So in Larimer County, you can see the outline in yellow there. We have two major watersheds that Jennifer alluded to in her presentation, the Cache La Poudre and the Big Thompson. This presentation that I'm giving today is actually in tandem with Hallie's presentation. We do a lot of very similar work. We are sister watersheds. We deal with a lot of the same challenges. And so this presentation is more just like kind of setting Hallie up for describing the projects that we do. I'm going to kind of go over the different challenges and the processes that we deal with. One important thing to notice in this map, if you notice in the watersheds, there's the green areas on the left or west side of the watershed. Does anyone have any ideas on what that is or what that indicates? The green areas in the watershed? Those are the forested areas. So that is very important to us. About 80% of all of our water supply in Colorado comes from our forested system. So when Jennifer was talking about the federal, the government that set aside all of our different federal lands, this is part of the reason. They wanted to protect our water supplies. Let's see. So our forest systems provide ecological services that help to maintain water quality and quantity. But our forests are actually susceptible to a lot of different issues. So a lot of our front range municipalities, different partners, they really work to focus on source water protection of those forested systems. What can disrupt a watershed? As you might imagine, pollution is one of the things that we really think about that can disrupt water quality, but it's not pollution in the sense of trash. We're talking about sediment is a main disruptor of water quality. We're talking about nutrients and metals, chemicals that enter our water systems. Land use management, things like roads, developments, grazing and agriculture, businesses, they all do have some type of impact on our water systems. And then finally, with climate change, as we're seeing our temperatures generally climbing, we have warming temperatures. Sometimes we're seeing more precipitation in areas. Sometimes we're seeing less precipitation in areas. We're seeing a lot more wildfires, flooding, and drought. And that's really what I'm going to be focusing on today. Oops. So here you see the Cache La Poudre watershed here, and then the Big Thompson down here. And this map shows wildfires over the past 10 years. And if you'll notice, one, wildfires have been getting larger and larger over the last 10 plus years. And two, they don't care where the watershed boundaries are. They're going to jump different jurisdictional boundaries. So the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed and Big Thompson Watershed Coalition, as well as many other partners, including the county, including our local municipalities, have been working very hard to address a lot of the issues that we're seeing from these fires. So of course, you see the outline of the Cameron Peak fire as well. We were unlucky enough to have the largest wildfire in Colorado's history. It burned nearly 209,000 acres. So, when we see fires burning and the immediate aftermath, we see all the pictures of homes burned and trees burned. But it's really, what we are really focusing on are the negative impacts for years, if not decades after a fire. So what's happening here? Before a fire happens, we have a healthy forest, and the trees have needles on them, they have leaves on them, and that forest canopy actually intercepts rainfall and precipitation, and it slows the velocity of that rainfall as it hits the ground, or before it hits the ground. The other thing in a healthy forest that is important is the soil. So it's got a lot of organic material, a lot of the duff layers, so the leaves and the needles all act like a sponge. So when the precipitation does hit the ground, it soaks it all up and it allows the groundwater to recharge. However, after fire, when we don't have those needles and leaves, the rainfall is actually hitting the soil, or what's left of the soil, at a high velocity, so it's disturbing what's left on the ground, and the soil is actually becomes hydrophobic after it burns so severely. So it's actually repelling water. It's no longer absorbing the water, and all of that rainfall does not, well, I shouldn't say all of it, very little of it gets absorbed by the groundwater, and it ends up just collecting on the surface and growing in volume, flowing down hills, growing in velocity, and what we end up seeing is scenes like this. So you can't hear it, but it's very loud. And so this is a stream system that is not used to this much water. So high volumes of water are reaching our stream systems that are near infrastructure. And the other thing you might have noticed is it's black water. And I don't want to drink black water. Our municipalities don't want to treat black water. So this is a huge issue. Fish don't want to swim in black water. So we're seeing long-term impacts following the fire. Again, not just homes burned, not just trees burned, but we're seeing erosion, oops, too many buttons. Erosion issues, flash flooding, all those, the high volumes of water are picking up trees and branches, sometimes picking up entire trees, picking up boulders, running into homes, destroying those homes, running into roadways, taking out culverts, dropping sediment in areas that we do not want it, killing fish. So that I know with the Poudre River, they've had a whole entire population of fish die off because of all the black sludge that ended up in the river system. So Hallie tonight is going to present a lot of the ways that we are addressing those issues. The other thing I wanted to mention that both of our coalitions are working on is wildfire risk and mitigation. So fires and these catastrophic fires and the negative impact that they present to us is something we want to avoid. And luckily there are ways that we can build our watershed's resiliency to fires on our landscape. This is a map from the Colorado Forest Atlas, and it shows Larimer County's risk, wildfire risk, to in relation to our important assets in the watershed. So those assets would be homes and infrastructure. This is another way to look at the issue. So this shows an aerial image of the same exact location in the Big Thompson watershed, comparing 1940s forest structure to 2017 forest structure. Aside from the fact that it's black and white compared to colored picture, does anyone notice something in particular that is different? There's more trees in the 2017 forest structure. So our forest systems along the Front Range, or not just on the Front Range, all over Colorado and in the West, they evolved with fire. They evolved with disturbances, and they're used to being more open. We have more openings in forest structure. We have less trees. We have more diversity in tree size and tree ages. But because of wildfire suppression over the past century, the forest densities have increased dramatically, and that presents a very huge fire fuel load in our forests. So luckily, there are ways that we can treat forests to prevent, or actually to restore forests back to how they used to be before European settlement, using things like forest thinning, even prescribed burning. So our goal in working together is to implement forest restoration so that we can have a healthy and more resilient watershed. These are some of the programs that align for both of our organizations. We both have forest restoration programs where we do treat and try to restore forests back to a more healthy state. Obviously, like I said, Hallie's going to talk about wildfire recovery. We focus on river restoration. And all of these projects, we incorporate some level of science and monitoring because we want to make sure the actions that we're implementing on the ground are achieving the goals that we set out to do. We really want to make sure, you know, if we're going to be managing and manipulating the landscape, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. And then incorporated in all of those are outreach and education because it is important to have an educated community. So like I was saying, we have a shared vision. We're both members of the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative, and we all work with other partners, work to create healthy and resilient Northern Colorado watersheds that can support wildfires, low-intensity wildfires, without causing those long-term damages to watershed services and communities. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Don't go too quickly. I see a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Laura. The two pictures of after a fire and so forth. When the new growth occurs, are there different trees that settle in there? Like if you lost a lodgepole area, what replaces it, and does that matter to your work in the watershed?
If a lodgepole was there before, it is probably going to come back afterwards. Those actually come back like carpets, which is good. You know, I mean, so that is a system that evolved with fire. Ponderosa pine is also a forest system that evolved with fire. One of the things that our organizations are focused on are the ponderosa pines. So where we are seeing the fire burn so severely that the seed source has been totally wiped out, we actually are working on reforestation projects to plant ponderosa pine in areas so we can make sure that, you know, because we want systems on the landscape that can support these low intensity wildfire events. And Hallie will talk a lot about that.
Good question, Bill. Brittany, got a question?
I'm using this slide as an example. Before the big fires, we had a lot of beetle kill. So it's kind of an intermediary to that, but does it affect it the same way?
Yes, yeah. So like I was pointing out in this image, just like wildfire, our forest systems evolved with disturbance events like beetle kill. You know, so it's all part of the cycle, right? And so, you know, the other thing that we're dealing with now that we might not have been, or we weren't dealing with previous to European settlement was climate change. So that is another aspect of this that is different. You know, we're seeing widespread beetle kill across all of our western forests. So that is just building the fuel load that is creating these catastrophic fires as well. Did that answer your, I don't feel like I fully answered your question.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right. Thank you so much, Laura.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Hallie. The clicker's right there. Great. And go ahead.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. Nice to see you all. So I'm Hallie. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. CPRW has been around since 2013. We started after the 2012 High Park and Hewlett Gulch wildfires that burned over 90,000 acres in the watershed. And since then, we expanded our working area probably about 5 or 6 years ago, but we work from headwaters in Rocky Mountain National Park all the way to the confluence with the South Platte River. So our mission is to improve and maintain the ecological health of the Poudre River watershed through community collaboration. Also just wanted to briefly highlight our programs, and they're really similar to the Big Thompson's programs as well. But everything that we do is really guided by various planning efforts that we've done. So we have a resiliency plan on the upper watershed. So we kind of think of the upper watershed as everything the canyon mouth up, and then the lower watershed, canyon mouth down through Fort Collins, Windsor, and Greeley. So all of our work is guided by these collaborative efforts that went into these different plans. And watershed resilience is really the baseline of everything that we do. So with our forestry program, our rivers program, education and outreach, science and monitoring, we're focused on watershed resiliency. So Laura already showed this image, but just a reminder, this is what I'm going to be talking to you all about tonight, is really our post-fire efforts across both watersheds, because both the Big Thompson and Poudre burned in the Cameron Peak fire. But again, just the scale and extent of fire that our county has seen in the last decade is really unprecedented. So after the Cameron Peak fire, a variety of different groups came together. In fact, it was over 40 people or entities came together to start planning for our post-fire restoration needs, because we knew that they were going to be extensive and could last up to a decade. In fact, after the High Park fire, we were working on projects through 2018. So one of the things that we did first was we came up with this prioritization plan. Because we have limited resources and there's a lot of impact. And so we really tried to focus our efforts in these higher priority watersheds. So what we did is, with a bunch of scientists from the Forest Service and also the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute, among others, we looked at a variety of different factors, including debris flow risk, the amount of post-fire sediment that we anticipated would be entered into the system, and also soil burn severity, because high and medium soil burn severity really impacts what we see in the river. And so we came up with this prioritization plan, which has really guided all of our work across the entire burn area, both the Poudre and the Big Thompson. So the Cameron Peak Fire Reforestation Program is really threefold. So it started with aerial mulching, and then into point mitigation and also reforestation, which Laura mentioned. And so the aerial mulching program was really what we first focused on. And the idea behind aerial mulching is just trying to get something on the hill slope before we start experiencing those monsoonal rains that come in June and July, and sometimes through August and September even. And this is really some of the science that has come out over the last decade has shown that aerial mulching can reduce the amount of erosion and sediment inputs into our water supply, which was one of the main reasons why we focused so heavily on this aerial mulching to begin with. So we did aerial mulching in 2021, so a year after the fire, and then again in 2022. And the science shows that it's really the most impactful when it's done immediately after a fire. And so this year we did not, we shifted our focus from aerial mulching. But in total, we mulched over 11,000 acres, and that's across both the Poudre and Big Thompson watersheds. Most of the mulching was done on U.S. Forest Service land, but there was also some mulching on state and private land. And this was a joint effort between the cities of Greeley and Fort Collins, the Big Thompson watershed, City of Loveland, and CPRW. Also the Forest Service was a key player as well. And so we, just as it sounds, you drop wood mulch out of a helicopter on these high priority areas. And that were identified using this prioritization plan. So then we started to shift our focus into point mitigation work, and this is kind of exactly what it sounds like. So it's more discrete location. So we find areas in different streams or areas where we want to protect infrastructure, and it's trying to do something in a smaller area. So this also includes a lot of the EWP work, so that's the emergency watershed protection work that was done across both the Poudre and Big Thompson watersheds, and that was led by Larimer County and the City of Greeley. So that initial effort, those EWP funds are used to protect life and property. So that's what's done really, what FIRST is done. And that's a program through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And then now CPRW and the Big Thompson and others like the City of Greeley are going into some different types of point mitigation work where we're really focused on work in streams where we want to trap sediment and keep sediment out of the water supply. So this is one of CPRW's really exciting projects that was completed last year. So this is a new buzzword that you might start hearing more and more of. It's called low-tech process-based restoration. And the idea is we're trying to work within this stream system and work with the processes that already exist and kind of enhance them so that it'll be more functional into the future. So this is an aerial view of the upper part of Elkhorn Creek, which is a direct tributary to the Cache-la-Poudre River. And this meadow right here was identified, was in one of our priority areas, but we were initially told about it because actually Colorado Parks and Wildlife have a diversion structure just upstream here, and they were having major sediment issues. So they wanted to see if there was anything that we could do. And unfortunately, there wasn't really anything that made sense to do in the stream up here. But then we found this beautiful old relic beaver meadow, which provided the perfect opportunity to implement some low-tech process-based restoration work. So trying to enhance this beaver meadow. We estimate that the beaver probably abandoned this area probably about 10 years ago. And so you can see there's these old beaver berms. And so what we're trying to do is we installed these, here's the old beaver berms. They're called post-assisted log structures. And so process-based restoration is done relatively cheaply. It's done mostly by hand. So hand crews installed these structures, post-assisted log structures that allow the water to pass through, but it does capture sediment. And over time will raise the water table and also bring vegetation back into this, this abandoned beaver meadow. And the ideal scenario, beaver would come back and maintain these structures for us. And we'll see if that will happen or not. But what I really wanted to highlight is this is just an aerial view from the structure this year. So it was implemented in 2022, fall 2022. So it's seen just 1 year of runoff. You can see in this one structure, there's tons of sediment that are behind the structure. So it's functioning just as we had intended. And instead of this sediment going downstream and into our water supply, it's instead in this meadow. And here is a photo of the meadow. This was actually this spring, so 2023 spring. But you can just see how it's able to slow the flow of water. The water's still making its way down. It's not trapping any water, but it is capturing sediment. So we're actually working with some researchers from Colorado State University who are doing a bunch of different studies on this project site and others across the burn area where we're working. But I have some really preliminary results that just came out. So they went into the stream channel, so they're not even looking at, I'm gonna go back. So they're just, right now, they have just estimated the sediment that's in the stream, not in the outside meadow area where water also went and sediment was trapped. So they'll be doing some other studies later. But what they found is just the sediment volume in the stream channel is it's a little over 2,000 cubic feet. And then I have some fun numbers of what that looks like. It's about 85 hot tubs worth of sediment or 1,000 kegs of beer of sediment. And so that's really exciting. This project is functioning just as we had intended. And this is just a really nice showcase project and highlights the work that CPRW and Big Thompson are trying to do with this low-tech process-based restoration work. I also just wanted to highlight, since we're on, I mentioned the CSU research study, the amount of research that's happening associated with the burn area and the different projects that we've done, including the aerial mulching work and the process-based restoration work, the point mitigation work. We're working with researchers from the Forest Service, from CSU, and others to really document lessons learned and figure out how effective our projects are, and so we can adaptively manage those if we need to, and when we have another fire, we'll be able to learn from everything that we've done so far. And then launching into our reforestation work. And so this is actually relatively new for us. After the Hyde Park fire, there wasn't as much data out about reforestation really being needed or successful, because you have to kind of have everything in line for this work to be successful. But really over the last decade, we're finding that ponderosa pine in particular are not coming back in these severely burned areas. So across the Hyde Park fire burn area and even Hayman fire from 2002. And so we started working with the Nature Conservancy, who has a big reforestation program, and we formed our own reforestation, Cameron Peak Fire Reforestation Group, which includes CPRW, the Big Thompson, Trees, Water People, the Conservation Corps, and Nature Conservancy. I think I got everyone. I should have put their logos up here. But so we're planting native ponderosa pine. We're using ponderosa pine from seeds that were collected from either the Poudre or Big Thompson, so they're local seeds, which helps to ensure their success. And we're planting them using these best planting practices that the Nature Conservancy has developed, also using a climate model. So we're planting these trees at higher elevations than they would normally be found, given future climate predictions. So at this point, we're about to wrap up our 2023 season, but across both the Poudre and Big Thompson, we've planted over 15,000 ponderosa pines and over 500 acres. And so it's a slow process, but it's really rewarding. And we're hoping that we'll be able to expand on these efforts and plant on Forest Service land in the future. At this point, we've only planted on private land. And then we're also working to actually collect pine cones as well, because we're running into a seed shortage. So there is a seed shortage across the West. The reforestation need across the West is very dramatic. It's millions and millions of acres that we need to reforest from all these massive fires that we've seen, but we don't have seeds. So we used to have a really large reforestation program. The Forest Service did in the 30s through basically I think the 70s or 80s, and then we just kind of stopped replanting trees. But now when we have climate change, et cetera, and these larger fires, it's really highlighting the need. And we were also, most of the seedlings that we've planted over the last 2 years have been from seeds that were collected in the 60s. And so as of next year, we'll be completely out of seeds, not just in the Poudre and Big Thompson, but across the West. And so CPRW and Big Thompson are trying to help with that by collecting ponderosa pine cones as well. So I finally just wanted to, these numbers need to be updated, but just wanted to end with the impact to date across both organizations and the municipalities that have helped, and the Forest Service and all the other partners. So over 40 partner organizations have been involved. This number has definitely increased after this year. Over 11,000 acres of aerial mulching, and then the fundraising efforts, over $25 million of federal funds and more have just come in actually this year to both to Greeley and to CPRW. Over $11 million of state funds, primarily from the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and then over $7 million of local and private funds.
Thank
So
you.
It's been a big effort.
Don't go anywhere yet. Do we have any questions for Hallie?
Laura and Hallie, thank you so much for the work you're doing, and I'm going to keep trying to find more time to join you all. I'm really glad you highlighted the seed deficit. There's a large number. I just thought maybe you'd like to repeat how large of a seed deficit there is across the country, because I heard millions of seeds and I heard a 70 million. Is that correct? And
for acres?
For the whole country. I mean, it's like, for people to understand.
Yeah, I think it is over 70 million acres need to be reforested.
Yeah,
from
there's a
fires
lot
of the
of-
last 2 decades.
And we have no seat, we're that much of a deficit for seats, so,
Yep.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think there was a question back here.
I just had a question about the relic beaver meadow.
Mm-hmm.
So is there like a max load of sediment that can accumulate before it becomes detrimental to the water flow?
That's a good question. I don't know if we have an exact number on what that would look like. I don't anticipate that that would happen in this particular meadow, just due to the size of the watershed.
Okay.
But yeah, I will say, you know, the log structures that we've installed aren't intended to be permanent, and eventually the sediment will move and shift and will go downstream. But the idea is to try to keep it, you know, when we have all these other sediment inputs across the burn area, trying to minimize it, you know, when we're seeing these massive debris flows and inputs of ash and sediment, you know, in as many locations as we can.
Got it.
With that, I'm going to invite all my presenters to come to the front, and while they are doing that, I want to put in a little bit of a plug. There's a flyer in the back. If you saw it when you came in, it's for the Larimer County Master Plan Vision and Goals Workshop that's happening actually in this exact room, in this exact building, on November 6th. So if you're interested in participating in that, there's more information about what will happen, what's going on. Grab a flyer on your way out. It looks just like this. I see most of you have one. That'd be great. So I'm going to grab the extra mic and hand it to my friend Julie, who's going to help me. Who wants to get started with questions? I see one up here.
This is kind of just a general question, but why do we have so many people involved? Why are there so many water providers? Historically, I mean, is there no hope of consolidation in the industry?
I'll take that
Go
one
for it, Eric.
as the water provider guy here. You know, Colorado and throughout much of the West has not been a fan of centralized planning. So there are plenty of examples where logically it might have made sense at some point in the past to have a larger statewide plan or regional plans for certain water providers and those sorts of things, but that hasn't been the way we've done things historically. You know, for Fort Collins specifically, the way we sort of ended up with so many water providers was that it was sort of an outgrowth of growth. In the 1960s, Fort Collins was much smaller. I've heard, this was before my time, I've heard that Drake Road was a dirt road, our mayor often tells me. And some of the outlying areas, which were then considered suburbs of Fort Collins, which were on well systems, asked the city to extend water service to them. And the city councilors at that time said, no, that's way out there, it's gonna cost a lot of money. So those folks established water districts to provide treated water to them, and the city actually helped them get going. And then over time, Fort Collins grew into those service areas. So it's just kind of I sort of see it as the outgrowth of kind of the mishmash, address the problem of the moment way we often do things. Consolidating organizations when they have different water portfolios and different legal things get in the way, it becomes pretty difficult in my experience.
All right, Bill has a question over here.
No worries.
So trying not to get into the political side of things too much, Jennifer's the expert here, but with different administrations, federally and state, you have different approaches to water. The one that's coming to mind most recently is WOTUS, the Waters of the United States, and you had a Trump administration that viewed it in a certain way. You had the Biden administration a certain way. The question is, how do regulations in that regulatory environment impact the successes that we're trying to have? And are there some state legislators that are looking to have more jurisdiction of some of the WOTUS components. I hope that's not too confusing. I see Jennifer smiling, so she has I think you know where I'm going with this. But how does it relate to the watershed component that we're looking at this evening?
So, just a little background. WOTUS, Waters of the United States. You have to, if you do anything to disturb that water, you have to get what's called a dredge and fill permit or a 401 permit under the Clean Water Act. That's a federal permit, and you have to go through a federal permitting process. It used to be about 20 years ago, you said that process was 10 years and $10 million. That's no longer the case, as Eric was talking about. It takes a long time and a lot of money to go through that process. Some administrations have defined waters of the United States as including everything that could touch the river. In fact, the example is these prairie potholes that really aren't near the river, but they do help wildlife, and they're part of the ecosystem. And then some administrations want to narrow that to where you're just exactly looking at that river and hardly anything around it. And so it's this classic give and take. And so to me, the effect mostly is timing of how long it takes to get a permit. I don't know if Eric would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I think in general at sort of a high level, particularly in recent months, the federal government has parts of the federal government, mainly the Supreme Court, has sort of limited the scope of some of the federal overall regulations. But because we have a federal system where both the federal government and the states have inherent authority, it's really kind of up to the states if they want to fill that regulatory gap. The state of Colorado currently is working to try to figure out a way to regulate things that the federal government is no longer going to regulate under the Clean Water Act. Figuring out the nuts and bolts of that is a big, very complex conversation. But one other thing I would just point out is there's a lot of inertia in the regulatory and legal system that is really hard to move even for individual administrations. You can look at not just in water, but in other areas, even when you have folks come in and a single party with an agenda comes and wants to re-modify a system, there's a lot of inertia to overcome with that. So, Fort Collins has been in this permitting program to be able to build enlarge Halligan, like I said, for almost 20 years now, and that seems to be about how long these projects take. And we've had some swings based on what administration is overseeing the Army Corps of Engineers, but not huge swings in sort of the day-to-day grind that you have with that project. So.
Thank you, guys. Other questions? Brittany's got a question.
Hallie, I think you might be able to answer this. In the slide that you had of the sediment being collected, I see a lot of the sediment is ash. And is there have they looked at the toxicity to that? Is that an issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. At this point, we, at least in 2023, we're seeing a lot less actual ash in the river. It's really more sediment, so soil and things that are coming down from the hill slope. But we are collecting water quality samples, so we're working with the Rocky Mountain Research Station. They're collecting water quality samples above and below most of our project sites, and then they have a pretty robust monitoring program. Rocky Mountain Research Station, as well as City Fort Collins, have a source water quality monitoring program, so they've been tracking the outcomes from the ash and sediment. And really, yeah, we're seeing increases in a lot of different nutrients as well, nitrogen and phosphorus. But the biggest issue for the water treatment providers is just the turbidity and the amount of sediment and ash that's been in the water. It's too expensive to treat. So in 2021 and 2022, both City of Fort Collins and Greeley had to shut off their intake structures off the Poudre River for over 40 days. And this year, I think it was about 2 weeks for both providers, so, yeah.
I've got one more question relating to the seeds.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the ponderosa needs fire to activate the seeds or release them from the cone. But I've heard in line with that the fires we've had recently are so intense that they actually destroy the seeds. Is that part of the problem?
Yeah, definitely. So lodgepole pine and both ponderosa and lodgepole have serotinous cones, but ponderosa pine cones still open up. They don't need fire as directly, really, like as much as lodgepole. So, but in lodgepole forests, we like to say that they live to die by fire. So we typically anticipate when lodgepole forests burn that it'll be a stand replacing fire. So that's pretty typical for lodgepole systems. But for ponderosa, they evolved with a more low to moderate severity fire. And so now when we're seeing these extreme fire events like Cameron Peak Fire and High Park Fire, it's completely, burning up that seed source. So, and ponderosa pine aren't super great at spreading their seeds out. And so when you've killed the seed source in the soil, there's nothing to come back after the fire. Versus lodgepole, we're not seeing that really being a problem. Lodgepole are coming back just as we would have anticipated. But it's really ponderosa and some of our other more sensitive pine species like limber pine that aren't coming back. And so that's why we're focusing on ponderosa in particular. And also these lower montane systems are just hotter and drier than they used to be, and so that certainly isn't helping their recovery either, which is one of the reasons why we're planting the seeds or the seedlings at a little higher elevations than we normally would see them. Yeah.
There's going to be a mic behind you.
Hi, thank you so much. This is mainly for Hallie and Laura. And to touch on Jennifer's point about snow being the biggest reservoir in Colorado, I'm curious if you all do any work in the wintertime, or is it kind of once snow comes, you kind of are at a standstill? I know that light reflectance and ash on snow is a big kind of component for melting faster. So wintertime projects.
So it kind of depends on what kind of work we're doing. We still do some of our forestry work in the winter. So when we're cutting down trees and doing wildfire mitigation work, like some of the logging companies that we work with still will work in the winter. But for a lot of the work, this like more point-based mitigation work, we do it more, really, it's really time limited. So we can't do it in runoff because the stream is too high, the rivers are too high. So we have to do it later in the summer into the fall. So we just wrapped up most of our work. We were hoping to do a project in November, but it's being delayed because of a variety of reasons. So it'll be pushed to next October. And then in terms of, you mentioned like the snowpack and snow melting faster. Yes, that is happening. So there are some CSC researchers in particular. Her name is Dr. Stephanie Kampf. She has a paper that just came out, and also there's been several articles that have highlighted her work, but they have found an increase in snow melt after a fire, and after the Cameron Peak Fire in particular, which is where their study area is.
Since we're working on pretty much the same projects, it's pretty much the same answer. If there's snow on the ground, sometimes we still are getting out to do forestry work, but it just depends on how intense the weather is. But I would say both of us, our organizations do still work on the flatlands. We've worked on a stream management plan for a 15-mile stretch from the canyon mouth to I-25 to focus on recovery, restoration efforts on the Big Thompson River. And I know Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed also has a lower river reaches water plan. So we are still, there's not snow on the ground all the time, but it definitely is a slow season for both of us.
Thank you both. Other questions? Commissioner Shattuck McNally.
So I just want to build off of Eric's comment after the Sackett versus EPA, the Supreme Court and change and narrow the definition of waters of the U.S. And so that's really a concern. If I know for a lot of us in Colorado, I know it sounds like I just had a long presentation and lots of questions today because I know local governments are just starting to sound like becoming a part of the maybe coalition to work for this, but I'm wondering if you are all involved with this new legislation. Looks like it's going to be introduced next year, which would have the state looking to increase regulatory protections for watersheds and waterways and wetlands and maybe even fens. And I didn't know if any of you have been at that stakeholder table or been involved, and if not, I certainly would like to encourage us all to be there if it sounds like it's moving forward. Anybody involved with some of that legislation?
I've been on a lot of long calls about that, so yes.
Okay, I might have questions for you if I can. So.
Oh wait, never. Can I change my answer?
So that's great to know, though. So, because I want to make sure we had a Larimer County voice, but none of the other watersheds or anything. Okay, at least I know there's somebody that from our area that's been at that table. Then, okay, thank you.
And Jody, I will just say, typically CPRW hasn't really, we haven't taken like a specific political stance on anything in particular, but it would have to be probably a board decision. But it's something, the WOTUS decision will definitely impact our work and the resiliency of our watershed. And so I think that's something that that could change for us moving forward in terms of at least trying to have a seat at the table for some of these decisions and making recommendations and things. So
with some of this beaver, this was actually mentioned this morning, the work of that of your work, and I think I heard it on NPR too. So I was really excited to see your work being showcased. Are any of you working on fens, which is something I learned about the fens and some of the, I know there's one on Mount Fairplay, I think there's one in Limerick County. Are we doing any work to protect the fens? And maybe I'll let Jennifer explain what a fen is.
Well, a fen is a very unique ecosystem that survives on a lot of water underneath it. And when I worked at the Water Conservation Board, we struggled to try to protect some of those fens. It's under the prior appropriation doctrine, it was a little difficult. But it's, I think that people are becoming much more aware of how important those are. They're kind of like their own little mini watersheds, actually. And so I think just raising awareness about them is really important.
Question in the back.
I had a question for Josh regarding the in-stream flow rights. Can you explain why in, I guess, 1973 when those were added, why those rights wouldn't have predated other senior users? Because I guess the beneficial use would have been predating any of the other beneficial uses.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, essentially, when the legislature enacted that, it basically just gave the CWCB the right to appropriate a new water right with the beneficial use as in-stream flow. So even, those priorities would have been after that 1973. You couldn't backdate those in-stream flows. That's where the acquisitions really come in. You buy those senior agricultural water rights, go to water court to change the water right to include in-stream flow as that beneficial use. And then you can get that senior priority to protect it in the stream.
I might tag team on that real briefly. Baked into the prior appropriation doctrine, or the prior appropriation system, is a thing called the postponement doctrine, where if you wait too long to go to court to get your rights confirmed, you get a later priority date. So the idea was, I think, when they first did these big adjudications where they went out in the late 1880s and said, everyone who has water rights, come to court and get your water right. If you waited and didn't do that, and you waited for the next round, you were behind everyone from the first round. And so that's sort of been built in from the beginning. So I think I heard your question to say, the water's been used in the stream since time immemorial, how come they don't get a priority date of, you know, like 0 AD or whatever? But that's because of this postponement doctrine. And it still works, you know. I came across a water court case not so long ago where someone had built a reservoir in 1912 and they forgot to go to court. And so they got a 2017 priority date. It's a bummer for them.
Yeah. Carrie, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Actually, I have a follow-up question about the in-stream flows, and I was wondering if you or if you're working with partners to evaluate the ecological impacts of those flows, and considering that a lot of times it's junior rights and they're not always happening. I'm just wondering of the intersection of your work and watershed health and what the actual impacts are.
Yeah, that's also a really good question. Like ecological health is really central to what we do. It's when we evaluate a water right for a potential project, that's one of the first things we look at is the benefit to the stream and what the stream needs. And part of that is because when the CWCB decides to appropriate or acquire a water right, part of their approval process dictates scientific kind of support of that decision. And so they'll rely on opinion from the Colorado Parks and Wildlife to say, you know, this much is needed for this stream reach in order to benefit this species of fish or this habitat. So when we are working on a project with the CWCB, CPW is often they're brought in very early in that conversation to say what that ecological need for that stream reach is, how much water would be beneficial, and what can be supported for the CWCP to decide.
So can I follow up question? So Josh, it used to be that that science was based on what a fish needs, not so much the ecological system. Has that changed, or is that still the standard?
I think that's still the standard. You know, we as a nonprofit will look to other benefits to the stream as well. But I think for the CWCB and making the decision, it's really that habitat for the fish.
Sorry, my question was more like the after you get the right for it. Like you can see, like, are there any studies being done, like comparisons of these have in-stream flow rights and these don't, and this is actually benefiting these species?
You know, we do have kind of stewardship as a part of the work that we do, so we're looking at that effect. I don't know that there's any, I don't want to say no, but I don't know to what extent that exists kind of statewide.
I think the answer is yes, though.
Yeah,
I was just at
yeah.
the
So I didn't
Sustaining
say no.
Colorado Watersheds Conference up in Avon a couple weeks ago. CWCB did present a project where they are doing research on a few different tributaries in the southwest part of Colorado. Their main focus was assemblages of plant species that individually are not endangered or threatened or anything like that, but these particular stream reaches, the assemblage of those plant species together was very unique. And so they were researching how those in-stream flows were benefiting those assemblages.
And actually, I should correct something. I think there are other ecological considerations when the CWCB decides to appropriate. So I think that comes more into improve. So with the acquisitions, there are other factors that they can take into consideration, and some of that is connecting areas of streams and tree health and things like that.
Great questions. What else do you guys have questions about? Don't everybody see, you know, if you wait long enough, someone will come up with a question to fill the silence. So.
Thank you. Josh, this is one more question. In your presentation, you mentioned the public trust model. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on exactly what we're talking about there.
Yeah, sure. So the public trust doctrine basically came out of, I believe it's English common law or even Roman law, but the idea came from navigability of waterways and the role of the government to maintain those for the public's benefit. In the last half century, that has been expanded to include protection of the waterways for its own sake or for ecological sake. So this really, the most famous case is Mono Lake. The public trust doctrine was found to exist in California. Not every state recognizes it. California said they did, and they used that to protect essentially the in-stream flows for Mono Lake, even though there was no kind of prior in-stream flow rights for those. So it kind of knocked some of the more senior uses down a peg. Colorado, for multiple reasons, has decided that the public trust doctrine doesn't work here, or doesn't work, or it's crosswise with the prior appropriation system, and that the prior appropriation system, using things like in-stream flow and other tools, can protect the environment just as well without the kind of negative consequences that can come from the public trust doctrine.
Good question. Okay.
So if no one has any other questions, I will end our panel discussion with a question that I'd like each one of you to answer, which is, what do you feel is the greatest challenge and the greatest opportunity for what you presented on today? And Jennifer, I don't know if that question applies to you, but go ahead.
Climate change and climate change.
I would say the greatest challenge is the scale of the need for in-stream flows and kind of the cost to put them in place. And I would say the kind of thing I'm excited about is maybe kind of public's interest in seeing waterways exist for their own sake, and that having waters in the stream is beneficial to all of us, can improve every sector from agriculture to municipal recreation, etc. So
I'm writing down my answer. Hold on. You know, I think this is a little bit outside the environmental theme of this evening, but I think probably the greatest challenge for northern Colorado and probably Colorado as a whole is the increased number of people that are coming, the increased industrialization, just overall growth, and the stress that's going to put on water supplies and additional transfers of water from agriculture to municipalities, and the additional infrastructure that's simply going to be needed. If you look up and down the Front Range, the large water projects that are being worked on are all taking a whole lot longer. They're costing a whole lot more than they ever did before. That's a real challenge. And even for entities that aren't doing those big water projects, they're doing other water projects with other impacts. They're just doing them in a way where they don't trigger the federal process. So that's all happening. I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is for really the people of Colorado to come to some peace with growth, which I know is a big ask based on a lot of conversations, and how we're going to deal with that. I think the biggest opportunity is more people getting involved. You know, throughout my time as a water lawyer, people come up to me and say, "Oh, water, it's so complicated. Oh my God." And I'm thinking, you should hear yourselves talk about business gobbledygook or taxes or things that just make no sense to me. But having more people involved, I think that really puts pressure on the system to be more flexible, to bring more people in, to address other values, those sorts of things. So that's my answer.
I was going to say that. No, I'm just kidding. No, but you did mention the growing stress on our water supplies that we will continue to have, and it's continuously growing. I think one of the challenges that we all have is exactly the reason why we're here today, is to educate people. I'm taking the Water Center's Water Literate Leaders course right now, and I mean, I work with the Watershed Coalition, and there's so much that I'm learning that I never even realized before. And I can probably say with accuracy that General John Brown or Joe Schmo, Jane Schmo, doesn't have any idea and doesn't think about it, and doesn't think about how they themselves can make an impact by not irrigating their lawn, or little steps. I know different municipalities and the county, hosting series like this. So I guess we just need to continue talking to our neighbors, talking to our friends about the imminent need of conserving our water.
So I guess I'll take it kind of down a few scales for some of the challenges that my organization faces in particular, and that would be the size of Rhode Island, as Jennifer highlighted. So it's a big watershed, and we have limited capacity. We're a staff of only 5, including myself. And with that is the lack of capacity is just the funding need to address all the variety of resiliency issues that we want to work on, from our forests to post-fire recovery to doing work in the river corridor, in Windsor and Greeley to implementing fish passage projects. Everything's just getting more expensive, and so trying to piece projects together, really, really important projects together, is definitely a challenge from that funding standpoint. But I think in terms of opportunities, for our coalitions and for the West, at least for the next 5 years, there's a really unique opportunity with the bipartisan infrastructure law and some of the other funds that have passed at a federal level. The amount of funding that's coming down for watershed protection and for wildfire mitigation work is really unprecedented. And this is, maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do some really good work at a watershed scale across the West. And so I think that's one opportunity I wanted to highlight. And also, I think just the excitement that I have seen from people in the community for some of the work that we've done, especially this process-based type restoration work, and getting excited about beavers again, and I'm going to make everyone a beaver believer. And that's just been really exciting for me. So.
Awesome.
I have one last funny story, and it's going to end with you all getting homework. So my neighbor, who's a dear friend of mine, is a brilliant man. He has a PhD, which he always makes fun of me for, because I don't have one. He runs a virus research lab. He's forgotten more things about science than I ever hoped to learn. And he was reading the New York Times, of course, because he's a scientist in Fort Collins. And he was telling me how he was feeling really smug about, these Colorado River issues. Boy, these people why are they building all this stuff in the desert? And I gently pointed out to him that half of the water coming out of each of our taps every single day is from the Colorado River. And he gave me this blank stare and almost turned pale, saying, are you serious? So, I mean, that's the point is, and then he got really interested in it. So, I mean, all of you can, bug your neighbors, family and friends, talk their ears off about water, and get more people involved. That's my story.
Awesome. Very good. Yes. And thank you again to our presenters for taking the time tonight to be here. Thank you to the Water Center and to the commissioners for hosting. I don't forget about the FCTV guys in the back for recording this so we can all rewatch it all again, right? And that's just a reminder, if you missed one of our early sessions, they are available on the Water Education Series page. We even broke them into like bite-sized bits for y'all. So if you wanted to watch one presenter at a time, one a day, we got that for you. And then a reminder, November 16th is our last session. What's next for water in Larimer County? It's not on November 11th, it is November 16th. And don't forget about the Water Master Plan Vision and Goals Workshop here on November the 6th. Oh yes, the 16th, we're back in Fort Collins. So if you attended the very first session, the hearing room in Fort Collins, we will not be here on November 16th. We will be in Fort Collins at the Administrative Services Building at 200 West Oak, where maybe you've gotten your license plates before. So with that, have a good evening. Thank you.